Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of the greatest show ever made. But first, I want to say thank you to all of you who took time to watch and react to my previous video, and another thank you to those who subscribed. If you didn't, that's alright. I'm just glad you made it this time. But if you did, thank you. Truthfully, I was a bit nervous about how it turned out, particularly the audio, which I did such a shitty job editing. Some comments said it sounded like AI, and I don't really blame them. I also started writing that script before I rewatched the show and finished both around the same time. And I wrote the script without first outlining it. And as I was putting the video together, I realized that was a mistake, one that I remedied this time around. So for this video, I planned to discuss characters on the other side of the law, and the theme of a personal code seemed the most fitting. As I started mapping this out, however, I realized I had a problem. See, I initially planned to discuss Avon and Marlo, get into Stringer and Avon, maybe even some Prop Joe, and of course, Omar. But as I began outlining, it quickly became clear that no, actually, that won't work. Omar needs his own video. And then I quickly realized something else.
Thinking it might be what you call one of them good problems.
So yeah, this is an Omar video. It not only does justice to his character, but also allows me to later explore what's going on elsewhere in the game. And there's a lot there. So since this is an Omar video, I said fuck it. Before the analysis, let's start off with some good old-fashioned Omar glaze. Omar is the best character in The Wire. I think that's a pretty uncontroversial statement. For me personally, he's not just my favorite character in the show, he takes the bronze medal as my third favorite character in all of television, behind Luthen Rael at 2 and Lalo Salamanca at 1. Omar lives and breathes the game, and he loves every second of it. He's smart, he has his code, and he's a ruthless killer, the coolest character in the show. I know a lot of people give that title to Slim Charles or Lester or Avon, and I won't argue with any of those votes. But for me personally, Omar takes the cake because he can talk about himself in the third person, and not only is it not cringe, it would feel strange if he did it. He's a character that's bought his own press because he knows, at worst, it's only a slight exaggeration. And we get to see him demonstrate that, at least for a time. The point here is that if you meet 100 fans of The Wire, 99 of them will say they love Omar, and the odd man out will get jumped by the other 99. So why is Omar so beloved? One thing that most people cite is Omar's code. In its simplest terms, he doesn't hurt anyone not in the game. No icing civilians. Much like Mike Ehrmantraut, another character I love.
He wasn't in the game.
But as the show goes on, we see how Omar's code actually plays out, how it bends, and how it affects others. And the show forces us to ask some tough questions about Omar's morality. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To give this video some structure, I decided it's best to go chronologically, because a large part of Omar's legend is how he's shown to us on screen. And as you can see by the timestamp, I realized that like 80% of Omar's screen time is important to explaining the character or the plot, is iconic, or both. He doesn't appear until the third episode, and before we even know his name, we see him with two other unnamed guys, staking out the pit, watching and waiting. A bit later, we see him clock the undercover cops, which is how he later knows Bubbles is Kima's CI.
Well, now.
Finally, he waits for the re-up and robs the pit. It's at this point we learn his name, Omar, and he and his boys get away clean. Now, what did we learn? Well, a lot actually. Omar is smart, patient, and observant. He's strategic and careful, and the fact that he's pissed his name is said adds an extra layer of mystery, almost like we the audience weren't supposed to know who he was either. At the same time, though, it does feel a little strange to me. Like, in the next episode, Bubbles says this to Kima.
Omar the Terror. Been ripping and bobbing out here for years now.
And given the giant face scar, I feel at the very least, Stinkum should have been able to clock him. Then again, he later says this to Brandon.
I just thought them coming down on y'all, baby boy.
So maybe this was his emotional, less rational brain talking, as he's more concerned for his partner's safety than keeping his own identity hidden. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Later in this episode, we learn that Omar is gay, And I say that so nonchalantly because the show presents it that nonchalantly. It's just like Kima. They're great characters who are also gay. And in the next episode, all of this characterization plays out. First, we see Omar plan the attack with John Bailey and Brandon. He literally sits in the dirt and draws it out with a stick, like he's drawing up plays in backyard football, complete with the X's and O's. Then they execute Omar's plan in one of the show's most iconic scenes.
Oh, shit!
Omar aura farms with the first farmer in the Dell Whistle, but loses some of those points when he cocks a double barrel shotgun. At this point, we've seen Omar go 2 for 2 in pulling off his robberies. He even gives some of it away, allowing him to better embed himself wherever he happened to be. Now, we get to see the consequences of his actions. He stole from Avon Barksdale twice, and now he has to retaliate. McNulty and Kima also know this, so they stake out Omar's man. A kid sees and runs to tell Omar. He's also got his little birds. In the next episode, Avon gets a pager that someone got, and McNulty later sees a report for John Bailey's murder. 39 bullet casings on scene. Clear retaliation. They learn this, but Omar doesn't know as they roll up for a parlay. And this graveyard scene is the prime example of a small scene being incredibly crucial. Up to this point, McNulty has expressed some admiration for Omar.
It's not the easiest trade, you know, robbing dealers.
And he's practically smitten when they first meet. This spawns bromance that I really wish lasted longer than it did. As they converse, McNulty recognizes Omar as legit, so he doesn't ask him to help them take down Avon. He implies it by saying they're going after Avon, and Avon's a problem for Omar, basically an enemy of my enemy argument. Omar, of course, sees through it, and he says this.
Snitching just rubs me wrong. Personally, I don't think the game is played like that.
For Omar, it's more than an enemy of my enemy. Helping the detail means helping the police, snitching, and Omar is not willing to cross enemy lines just yet. But McNulty and Kima are playing the long game, and not only do they keep the offer on the table, but McNulty again tells Omar in a roundabout way about John Bailey. For Omar, this highlights the danger he and Brandon are in, and even though he's against snitching, he gives them Bird, a little nugget of information that seems to crack McNulty.
Hey, wait. Hold up. Come on, don't play me.
After all, Bird is only the fourth name they have on Avon's crew. But not only does Omar refuse to elaborate, he then drops another little nugget.
I think your snitch can handle that. Shit, Bubbles no bird.
Indirectly telling them he knows more than he's letting on, and they part ways. Dude was on some Lord Barris shit in this scene. A lot of plot happens between now and the next time we see Omar, specifically the kidnapping and killing of Brandon. I really have to resist the urge not to fully delve into the ripple effects of this event, specifically what it means for Dee and Wallace and the Barksdales as a whole, but my god, this scene is phenomenal. Instead of seeing the act go down, we watch the game of telephone play out over the computers in the empty office, and it's incredible. To kick off the next episode, we see Brandon's tortured corpse sprawled out in the low rises as a message. Avon's boys went wild. Specifically, McNulty notes cigarette burns and cracked forearms. They were looking for Omar, but Brandon didn't give him up like a fucking king. Unfortunately for them, however, this proved to be the beginning of the end for the Barksdale gang, because this event spurns Omar to fully cooperate with the case, and it's at this point we see the most crucial element to his character. Omar may live by his code, but he is driven by a vengeance. And when the chips are down, Omar's desire for revenge trumps his code. After all, we heard him tell McNulty his anti-snitching position, but after visiting Brandon's body and accidentally scaring the shit out of McNulty's kids, he's ready to play ball. McNulty and Kima take Omar to the office, and McNulty does my job for me.
Man, why we ain't in no real police office?
Well, we look like you, Omar. Out here on our own, playing the game for ourselves.
Omar ultimately tells them about Brandon, and Lester realizes the pager connection. Later, he tells Kima about Bird and his gun, and she says the gun won't cut it. She needs a second witness, at which point Omar volunteers. It's all but confirmed later, but it's easy to pick out here that Omar is lying. He's only willing to testify so Bird gets locked up, and he's willing to lie to ensure that happens. He then talks about it to Bunk in the next episode, and this is the first scene where he really lays out his individualistic streets of Baltimore sense of morality.
I mean, don't get it twisted. I do some dirt too, but I ain't never put my gun on nobody who wasn't in the game.
This is his firm line. Anyone outside the game is off limits. And to his credit, across all 5 seasons, Omar never takes a shot at a taxpayer. Bunk agrees with this sentiment.
A man must have a code.
Oh, no doubt.
A line that proved to be life-saving for Omar later down the line. As the conversation continues, they connect over their shared time at high school.
Yeah, you was ahead of me. I remember you was the first brother I ever seen play that sport with a stick.
I did the math, and if Omar was a freshman when Bunk was a senior, Bunk would be 32 in this scene. And I think that works. Joined the force out of high school at 18, has 14 plus years on the job, fine. It's at this point Omar points them to another murder done by Avon, knocking out a second case just for shits and giggles. But just because he's helping the cops doesn't mean he's not doing his own part. At this point in the plot, Stinkum is set to take new territory and get some points on the package. He and Weebay get a plan to take out some guy named Scar. They get ready, set up, and just as Stinkum gets up to go,
Hey now.
guys, call me basic. This shit is so awesome. I know, it's glorifying violence, but that's not even what does it for me. It's being able to fully grasp what led to this point. Why Stinkum and Weebay are there, why Omar is there, and none of it feels cheap or out of place. All of it feels earned. It's not about the violence. It's about the game of cat and mouse. Anyway, Omar one-taps Stinkum and tags Weebay, and then has yet another Aura Farm moment.
Hey, yo, lesson here, babe. You come at the king, you best not miss.
This right here is what I mean when I say Omar is the coolest character in The Wire. If anyone else called themselves the king after a post-homicide whistle, they are the king of cringe. But Omar, it just works. I can't explain why. It just does. And importantly, he doesn't finish off Weebay, as part of Omar's code is anti-execution, something we'll see evolve later. I'm sure he'd rather have iced Weebay in the initial ambush, but he'd rather let him live than murder a man while his guard is down. The detail here is about Omar's extracurricular activities and pull 'em up, and so much happens in such a short scene. First, Omar just straight up bullshits.
I don't know nothing about Stink getting dropped, and I don't know nothing about Bay taking one in the leg either.
When that doesn't work, he explains his rules.
Rules? Yeah. No mistakes, no bystanders, no taxpayers getting caught up in the mix.
Ultimately, given the case he gave them on Bird, they decide to only ask Omar, pretty please, that he hangs back and let them work the case. And what's his reply?
Hey, look, man, it ain't all up to me, right? I got a bounty on my head.
More bullshit. I'm not saying he's entirely wrong, but it's one of those half-truths that's also a full lie. He says, guys, I got this bounty. I'm a wanted man. As he peers over the corkboard, spots Orlando's and instantly starts plotting his next steps. And honestly, I know Lester, Kima, and McNulty are a trio of the show's best cops, but I think this moment is what Daniels had in mind when he said this in season 4.
Or use and not get used by an informant.
Anyway, Omar stakes out Orlando's and starts plotting his next steps. Ultimately, this leads to yet another Omar buys his own press scene, where he robs the low-rises in broad daylight. I've seen a lot of people wonder why no one just popped Omar then and there, and I think that would carry weight if the twins were in the low-rises. But Omar's wearing body armor, and we eventually see how these guys shoot. So Omar takes his newly acquired G-Packs to Prop Joe.
Saying I got a little proposition for you.
He offers these to Prop Joe, free of charge, provided he can get a line to Avon. Prop Joe gives it to him, then tries to scare him.
What makes you think I just ain't gonna take this shit off your hands and throw your ass up out of here?
But Omar's smart enough to see through it.
Come on, man. Avon goes down, the prices be open market again, right?
With the intel gathered from the police and Prop Joe, Omar makes his play. Again, this is a scene where I really don't know what else to say beyond, that's so sick. Oh, except that Weebay is truly a god-tier friend.
Yeah, cheese fries, baby. I got you some.
Omar, the patient strategist, exploits the weakness in their communication strategy and waits until Avon is isolated to make his move. But like Avon himself said,
Be a little slow, be a little late, just once.
Omar was just a little late and didn't see Weebay around the corner, and it nearly cost him. After this, though, Avon decides to call a fake truce, which I'm pretty sure violates the Geneva Conventions. Omar, after hearing this, goes to Kima and McNulty for help, and McNulty is so in love with Omar.
How close did you get?
They get him to a doctor, again getting used by their informant, and he goes to meet with Stringer about the truce. But right before then, we get this absolute gem as Prop Joe describes marriage counselors.
Charge by the hour to tell some fool he need to bring some flowers home. Then charge another hour telling the bitch she ought to suck some cock every little once in a while. You know, keep a marriage strong like that.
On paper, that's the funniest line in the show as far as I'm concerned. Throughout their conversation, I think it's clear that Stringer knew Omar was wearing a wire. He's extra careful not to mention Avon.
I don't know nobody called Barksdale, B.
And while it's definitely not out of character, Omar was pretty openly rolling with McNulty and Kima, and the streets are always watching. As for Omar, he snuffs out the bullshit and decides to leave till things cool off. Before season's end, McNulty puts his man crush on a bus to New York, and to bookend the first season, we see Omar doing his thing with the New York skyline behind him. I bet if this were 20 years later, there'd be some kind of a web-exclusive miniseries on Omar's adventures in New York between the first and second season, but sadly it does not exist. Overall, in the first season of The Wire, Omar is a tour de force. He's smart, patient, observant, lethal, he lives by his code, and above all, driven with vengeance. Almost all of the non-money portions of the case can be traced back to Omar. He decommissions Bird and Stinkum and damn near adds Weebay and Avon to that list. And he does all of this in about 7 episodes. But even then, we see his actions have consequences, leading to the loss of a lover, and his revenge tour leads him to skipping town for a bit. Going forward, however, while keeping all the same characterization, Omar's role involves a lot more reactivity. It's not to say he lacks autonomy or anything, just that he's more often roped into the schemes of other characters. He's less of an active participant in creating the plot, as he more often advances the plot by reacting to the schemes and actions of others. We see a microcosm of this when we see him for the first time in the second season. Like the first, it's not until the third episode, this time the cold open. He's with his new boyfriend, Dante, planning a rip and run when they watch Kimmy and Tasha beat them to the punch. For Omar, though, it's nothing more than a game-recognized game moment, and by the next episode, they're teamed up. They all know their strength in numbers. But in the 2 episodes prior, Omar is the name on everyone's lips. Off rip, Bunk is pulling evidence for the Bird tribe. And who's the star witness? Omar, who's out of pocket at the moment. It's on McNulty to find him, so he delegates this task to Bubbles. He does what is asked, and Kimmy overhears. She tells Omar off-screen, and being the hunter he is, Omar lays scrap metal for Bubbles to find, and he does.
Snitching bubs.
But once Bubbles makes clear why he's coming for Omar, it's all good, and he's eventually the star witness. But I want to take a second and talk about Omar and Bubbles, because it's important characterization for Omar. It's obvious that he's the only one who knows Bubbles is Kima's CI. After all, Bubbles does the Red Hat routine 4 times throughout the series, and if someone caught on to it, he'd quickly get got. Just look at what happened to Randy. Yet for Omar, snitching is not an executable offense. He only commits violence to those who wrong him. He also keeps it to himself, as he knows spreading the word on Bubbles' CI status is no different than killing Bubs himself. I'm not trying to imply that Omar acts strictly defensively or anything. If he had to, he would ice Bubs, and he spent the previous season ambushing Stinkum and Weebay and then Avon himself. But then again, it's not because Omar woke up one day and decided, let me go decapitate this drug gang real quick. It's out of revenge. Yes, he commits dozens of armed robberies, but if he gets what he wants without needing to blow up anyone's kneecap, that's what he'll do. It's a very selfish, violent, and authoritarian way to live, but at the end of the day, that's Omar's code when he plays the game. And it's this status that Levy so heavily preys upon when Omar takes the stand for the Bird trial. I gotta take some time to talk about this one. Even before he takes the stand, we see some great McNulty bromance.
It's a look.
No, it ain't.
And we see some interesting characterization, showing a different side of Omar.
See, back in middle school and all, I used to love them mitts. Stuff was deep. Truly.
When he's questioned by Eileen Nathan, he very quickly admits to who he is.
I robs drug dealers.
To me, this indicates that, in addition to reading Greek myths as a teenager, he also managed to find a copy of A Game of Thrones. On the cross, Levy does everything in his power to discredit him. He recites his criminal record to the court, seeming to take away Omar's credibility, but Omar quickly takes it all back by correcting Levy.
What was it, Mr. Little?
I shot the boy Mike in his hind parts, that all.
This joke, which even gets a laugh out of Judge Phelan, is a brilliant power move. Not only is it a speed bump for Levy, but it's also the perfect line for the jury. It charms them, disarms Levy's attack to this point, and very subtly indicates to them that he's calculated in his work, no matter how violent or criminal the jury may view it. It's at this point Levy begins to call out Omar for his way of living.
You walk the streets of Baltimore with a gun, taking what you want when you want it, willing to use violence when your demands aren't met. This is who you are.
But Omar takes after Tyrion and makes his identity his armor. He's got no delusions about who he is or what he does. And not only does he own up to it, he's proud of it. He plays the role of the honest thief and says it's up to the jury to decide whether or not they believe him. It's at this point Levy tries to entrap Omar, implying his real motive for witnessing is that he was the one who killed Gan. And Levy questioning Omar's code is the first time Omar displays any sort of anger.
Hey, look, I ain't never put my gun on no citizen.
He'll own up to using violence against dealers, but taxpayers? No. And whether conscious or not, this flash of anger basically draws a line in the sand for the jury. And just as Levy starts to make admittedly valid points about Omar's nature, Omar pulls the Uno reverse card and drops easily a top 5 line in the show.
I got the shotgun. You got the briefcase. It's on the game though, right?
It's all in the game. In one sentence, Omar destroys any sense of superiority Levy tried to create by putting them on the same level. They both get paid by the same clientele, just by different means. And this proves to be one of 2 times in the show that Levy is caught completely off guard, once in the courtroom and once in his office. He's got nothing for the court, and even Phelan looks at him like, the fuck you want me to do? So Omar's testimony propels Bird to get a life sentence on a first-degree murder charge. The irony, of course, is that the entire time he was on the stand, Omar was completely full of shit. He didn't witness anything. On a meta level, he lied through his teeth while playing the honest thief. But on a personal level, he cooperated with the cops on his own terms. He was willing to cross enemy lines to play the enemy of my enemy, but along the way, he got away with murder. Fucking literally. That's how he internally justified snitching on the Barksdales. He had the motive and did so on his terms, and it was all worth it for this moment.
Now for the ceremonial light fire.
He has a final exchange with McNulty, gets a card from Eileen Nathan, and says farewell. For McNulty, this is sadly the end of his bromance with Omar. For Omar, we next see him once again reacting to the schemes of other players. Here's the one-paragraph explainer. Stringer wants to let Prop Joe into the towers so they can make bank with the good Greek product. Avon does not. And to hold the towers, he sends Brother Mouzone. More on him in a minute. This makes Stringer and Prop Joe angry and terrified. So Prop Joe gets the idea to use Omar. He calls Blind Butchie, who is Omar's bank and confidant, and tells him Stringer is looking for a parlay. That's where we pick up his story. So Omar goes to meet with Stringer, and he makes clear there is no love lost.
Boy, you don't know. I've been dreaming of running into you again.
Omar makes clear his desire to finish avenging Brandon's death, and it's at this point Stringer turns the conversation. He owns up to putting the word out on them, and they agree it's in the game. But Stringer disowns the torturous activities, pinning them on Brother Mouzone. He offers this to Omar, telling him it makes them square, and Omar goes out. Now, a lot of people argue about Stringer. Some say he's a 300 IQ street wizard, others claim he's a total fraud, and everywhere in between. That would make for a good video, wouldn't it? For now, all I'll say is Prop Joe and Stringer's plan was entirely dependent on Omar being so blinded by revenge he fails to do his due diligence. Because we see after the fact, if Omar had talked to Butchie about Stringer's words beforehand, he would have known Stringer lied. This seems ill-conceived from them. At the same time, it's entirely in character for Omar not to do his due diligence. We've seen him on the vengeance-fueled hunt. The man is relentless. Instead, he devotes his time to staking out Brother's hotel room. He sees Lamar feed a dog and do a fancy knock. So Kimmy and Tasha roll up with Butchie's dog, and Omar does the fancy knock. Brother answers, and unlike his interaction with Bubbles earlier in the season, Omar shoots first and asks questions later. I haven't talked about Brother Mouzone yet. I've seen that he's a somewhat polarizing figure, but me personally, I love him. Even before we see him, the name fills everyone with dread, except me. I was filled with anticipation. And the well-read hitman did not disappoint, and he, like Omar and Avon, is strictly old school. After getting popped, the first thing he asks Omar is,
You kill my man?
and Omar replies,
Nah, he rested.
Omar explains why he's there, Brandon, and they both agree it's in the game, but Omar takes the torture personally. Brother says it wasn't him, and Omar accuses him of lying, to which Brother replies,
I'm at peace with my God. Do what you will.
and prays. To me, this is one of the hardest moments in The Wire. We know so little about Brother Mouzone, other than he likes to read and...
Nigga got more bodies on him than a Chinese cemetery.
But here he is, staring down the barrel of a gun for an act of which he is innocent, and rather than explain himself or make his case, he just says the game is the game. For Omar, this is another real recognize real moment, and he lowers his gun. It's only at this point Brother tells Omar that torture is not his style, and this really seems to deal the seal for him. He calls 911 and does this little gesture to Brother before leaving. This can be interpreted a lot of different ways. My bad, it's all in the game, it's in God's hands now, see you around. Any one of these is correct, in my opinion, as well as any I neglected to mention. Omar leaves unsatisfied and talks to Butchie. It's at this point that Butchie tells him Brother was in New York the year before, meaning it was a setup from the start. Butchie says he should have known, taking the blame like a true friend, but that's really on Omar. Like I said, all Omar had to do was say a few sentences to Butchie and the whole thing could have been avoided. Not saying he should have, makes for a much better plot and more consistent characterization if he doesn't. But in the end, all Omar can do is declare revenge on Stringer. At the same time, Stringer overplays his hand and visits Brother in the hospital, meaning Brother Mouzone and Omar share an enemy by season's end. Now, I gotta break my structure here. I'm gonna save the beginning of the third season for the end of the video, as it makes much more sense for the sake of flow. But let's just say that, for reasons irrelevant at the moment, he calls off his feud with the Barksdales. But Avon is not having it.
Omar ain't come back on us since we got his bitch. So maybe...
Look, I'm home, Charles.
So Avon, like a true American, decides to ramp up two wars. And this involves putting a stakeout crew on Omar's grandma's house. And they eventually catch sight of Omar, dressed up for Sunday morning church. And they make their move. They miss, of course, but this is a big no-no. As we learn later in various scenes, there's this Sunday morning truce. Once a week, all the murderous gangsters call a ceasefire for a few hours to go hear about peace and love in church. So to the Baltimoreans in the game, this is an attempted mini Red Wedding, which really explains Slim Charles' anger here.
Y'all trifling with Avon Barksdale reputation here.
I'm going to save a further breakdown of this social contract breakdown for a later video, and instead focus on Omar's reaction to this event. He goes on a rant of not unjustified righteous anger, saying he was ready to give up the Barksdale feud, don't ask me why just yet, but now it's worse than before, foreshadowing what's to come for Omar. Kimmy says she's out, and when Dante tries to stand with Omar, he says no, saying it's personal for him. This is something I've neglected to talk about yet, and now's as good a time as any. Another element to Omar that many people love is his humanity. He doesn't swear, which I respect. Couldn't be me. No fucking way. And he has a soft spot for kids. Those both in and taking him out of the game. Also, throughout the show, he shows a deep, genuine love for all of his partners. Maybe it's just me, but I think Brandon was Omar's true love, given that he was still waging war on his memory 2 years after the fact. But while Omar is off on his own, gearing up to go after Avon and Stringer, someone else is looking for him. Brother Mouzone gets a lead on Omar and sends the incredibly homophobic Lamar to the clubs Omar is known to frequent. He does this to either draw out Omar or Dante, and it's eventually successful. After some off-screen questioning, Brother eventually gets Omar's location and confronts him in the alley, and thus commences what is tied for my favorite scene in the show. To this day, I can't help but smile whenever I see it. The dialogue is literally Shakespearean.
Worrying about you be like wondering if the sun gonna come up.
Omar, with a gun drawn on him, asks about Dante, and Brother replies,
He's resting.
on a character level, Omar and Brother, in their brief 90-second interaction that began with Omar blasting Brother, understood that they're both cut from the same cloth. It wasn't personal for either of them. It was all in the game. And thus, as the scene goes on, we're pretty sure that neither of them will squeeze the trigger, but the camera work is that of an old Western duel, keeping the audience on its toes until the very end. But once Omar's listening, it's over for Stringer. Brother, being who he is, confronts Avon before going after Stringer, essentially getting his blessing to ice his queen. There's more to it than that, but I'll save the Avon and Stringer angles for another time. Omar and Brother team up to ambush Stringer. Omar blasts his muscle, and he turns his gun on Andy Crotchet. He quickly realizes he's a civilian and lowers it, but before leaving gives a look of pity, as in, I get you just got jumped, but have some self-respect. Omar and Brother corner Stringer, who first tries to bargain.
Money?
Is that it?
Unfortunately for Stringer, Omar is not in it for the money.
The boy gave you up. That's right. And we ain't had to torture his ass neither.
Great 2-for-1 right here. The final two things Stringer learns before dying are that Avon gave him up and his fate is sealed. He takes one final look at Brother and knows there's nothing he can say. So he accepts his fate and is murdered unarmed. Not to get all fucking Star Wars nerd on you here, but if you slow this down, Brother is actually the one to kill Stringer. Committing murder in cold blood like this goes against Omar's code, so he lets Brother take the first shot. That said, Omar does let a couple shells fly, and I can't decide if this is out of obligation to finish the job with Brother or a genuine desire to shit on Stringer in his final seconds. Or a bit of both. Either way, these shells are his calling card, and Bunk knows it. What's interesting here is that McNulty defends his BFF.
Execution style that don't play like Omar Little.
As for Omar, Brother is true to his word and returns Dante.
What's done is done.
That's just another way to pronounce it's all in the game. He gives Dante a look and they leave, but before they go, Brother gives him his Walther PPK 380 double action to dispose of, and he does so, throwing them into the harbor of the now abandoned pier. Afterward and off screen, Omar dumps Dante, likely unimpressed with him saying,
I took it for as long as I could.
Given that 2 seasons earlier, Brandon didn't say a word as he got turned into a YouTube censor. And that's the end of the 3rd season. To start the 4th, he yells at Ronaldo, his new boyfriend, over their lack of Honey Nut Cheerios. Valid. He grabs his 50 cal and goes to get the new Cheerios, stops to light a cigarette, and gets gifted a stash. He gets back to his house, annoyed with this effortless success.
How you expect to run with the wolves come night when you spend all day spunking with the puppies?
This mentality right here is why Omar got away with his chicanery for over a decade. He decides to up the stakes and rip off old face Andre. He and Ronaldo talk about how to go about it, and Omar says the point is to be seen.
The camera. If you go in front, they're gonna...
They supposed to know it's me, man. I'm my own trademark, you feel me?
They also spot Kima, and Omar says there's no bad blood. So far.
I like Shorty too. She alright. Long as she don't get in my way.
All 3 of them watch a re-up go down, and after the next one, Omar plots his move. He sends Ronaldo in as a distraction, and rips through the glass with his 50 cal. He then asks for a box of Nupos, a symbolic foreshadowing of doom in The Wire. and Andre hides a certain ring as he gives up the stash. After this, it's a while before Omar really creates the plot. As the show continues, Prop Joe tries to get Marlo to join into the co-op. He tried the carrot, and now he's gonna try the stick. He knows Marlo loves to lose at poker, so to whom does he take this information? Omar, of course. They meet up at Butchie's bar, and Prop Joe illustrates why he's lasted as long as he has in this here game. He lies to Omar and Butchie, arguably the more impressive feat, and says Stringer used them all. He offers up the card game, hoping they can call it even, and I'm sure that's not a lie. He does not want bad blood with Omar.
Businessman such as myself does not believe in bad blood with a man such as yourself.
It's also an interesting parallel how Stringer and Prop Joe both use Omar to do their dirty work. Anyway, Omar takes the info and does indeed run wild with it. Just as Marlo finally wins in poker, Omar and co roll up and rob them.
I don't know about cars, but I think these 4-5s be the full house.
Omar goes on a generational run, averaging one iconic line every 12 seconds, and also takes now Marlo's ring and calls him Shorty. This is something he cannot let go of, and while he plans to retaliate, Chris encourages him to think more strategically. They ultimately plan to get Omar arrested without bail, so Chris blasts some poor delivery lady and makes Andre say,
Omar.
This puts the warrants out on Omar, to the enjoyment of the Western District cops, but the disbelief of McNulty.
You ever know Omar to do a citizen?
The next we see of Omar, he spots the police and disarms himself before getting stopped. We see it's Officer Walker, who's clearly from the streets, that is able to take him, and his ring. He's told he's going to prison for a taxpayer murder, and luckily for him, his star-crossed lover is also there.
Hey, Omar.
What the hell going on here?
Omar asks for a phone call, and McNulty turns to Walker, who approves. Interesting moment here, where they both go out of their way to help a murder detainee, but for different reasons. McNulty offers the phone because he knows something's up, and Walker allows it as a kind of fair play after he took Baltimore's Ring of Sauron. Omar talks to Butchie, and it's covered in like 10 seconds. When he arrives at prison, Omar causes something of a scene. He gets put in solitary and receives a visit from two large men. Omar is ready for a final showdown, but they're with Butchie. It's all good. They give him a shank and Eileen Nathan's card from back in season 2. Later, we see a bit of his life in prison. He wears phone books as makeshift body armor that turns out to be life-saving, and he has to make a display of dominance that I think is also not YouTube friendly. Once he has a moment of safety, he decides to make a phone call.
Who you calling? Police.
The police?
Man, do me a favor.
Bunk arrives at the prison to meet with Omar. He gives him Eileen Nathan's card and tries to get Bunk to help get him out because he found the police gun. But Bunk makes clear that the gun only got him the meeting.
The only reason I'm even here is because of that gun.
Omar tries to plead his innocence by citing his code, but Bunk takes the high road. He cites Omar's murder scenes throughout the 3rd season and chalks the whole thing up to a case of ironic injustice. He gets up to leave, and after telling Bunk about the bounty, Omar drops the logic bomb.
Now, if Omar ain't killed that delivery lady, somebody else did. But you giving him a free walk right now, though, ain't you?
And he gives Bunk Eileen Nathan's card by saying,
A man got to have a code.
I want to talk more about this in a moment, but Omar's words do spurn Bunk to action. He first meets with Eileen Nathan to get Omar moved to a safer place, closing the loop on that seasons-long plot thread.
Tell Mr. Little my debt's paid.
Then Bunk works to prove his innocence. This does create friction within the homicide division.
Listen, you backseat driving motherfucker.
But he does successfully convince Vernon to work it back, and Old-Face Andre quickly cracks. They take their handiwork to Landsman, who is very pleased with his veteran detective's ethical police work.
The fuck did you do? And why'd you let him do it?
Hey, listen to me.
No!
This frees Omar, and when Bunk goes to pick him up, we get this exchange.
Told y'all Andre was lying on me, y'all.
I didn't do it for you.
This is why I wanted to wait. When Omar says this,
A man got to have a code.
It reads to me as Omar trying to get Bunk to appeal to his code. At this point, Omar knows if Bunk leaves, he's dead. So when he says a man's got to have a code, it's him trying to say, I have a code, remember? I didn't do this. So in his mind, when Bunk takes the card, his plea is successful. But when Bunk says,
I didn't do it for you.
it's clear that Omar's words hit Bunk in a different way. Omar unknowingly appealed to Bunk's code. When Bunk hears that the real killer is walking, he knows he has to work to clear Omar's name. He doesn't clear his record, just specifically this murder. He did it on principle, not for Omar. And at this point, they both know he owes Bunk his life, and Bunk makes his demands.
No more fucking bodies from you. No more comebacks or get evens on this.
Omar doesn't take it all, but he gives Bunk what he needs.
Alright, man. Nobody's on me.
It speaks volumes that Bunk, a homicide detective, can hear this from a hitman who he has open murder files on and know he will keep his word. After this, Omar sets to get his comeuppance without dropping bodies. He first looks for Andre, but Andre's busy taking a stroll with Chris and Snoop. He instead goes looking for Marlo, who he only knows as the man who put the bounty on him. And when he sees the guy he robbed at the poker game, he puts two and two together. A couple of things here. First, even if Omar didn't know who Marlo was, I completely buy him finding their hideout. After all, we know he's observant, and seeing a bunch of drug dealers filtering in and out of the same area would make him suspicious. And of course he would set up shop during the hour of the wolf. On the other hand, it's because of these observational skills that Omar absolutely should know who Marlo is. That's the part I don't buy. I fully understand the idea they were going for with Marlo. He wanted his name to ring out, but his actions facilitated the exact opposite.
Trouble with doing it this way, disappearing them and shit. Nobody knows.
Even if we're gonna say that Omar was clueless to the vacates, something literal children knew about, fine. Even then, Marlo spent 2/3 of last season warring with Avon Barksdale and Stringer Bell, who were in Omar's crosshairs. There's no way those guys start dropping bodies and Omar says, there is no reason for me to learn who those guys are fighting. Again, I get the thematic consistency, but it comes at the expense of character consistency. Anyway, they watch Marlo until something interesting happens. Along the way, Omar sees Michael approach him, and we get this little bit of foreshadowing.
He's just a kid.
They eventually see Slim Charles, who they decide to follow from there. They follow him to Prop Joe's shop, and later to the co-op meeting, where Marlo arrives in attendance.
The word done came full circle.
Marlo.
It's at this point that Omar gets his plan together and pays a visit to Prop Joe, interrupting an incredibly intellectual discussion.
You know who got the fattest asses and the best pussy? Midgets, nigga.
Omar threatens Joe, saying he knows about the co-op and plans to rob Marlo. He gets him to give up the re-up from the Greeks, and to ensure his compliance, he reminds him of their previous partnership.
I might got to go tell Marlo you the one put me up on that card game.
He leaves the clock and takes a receipt from Joe, at once indicating he's living on borrowed time and that his life is in Omar's hands. However, Omar has bigger plans. He's gonna take the whole re-up. To execute this plan, he recruits Kimmy, and they pull it off without dropping bodies. She takes her cut and retires, and Butchie suggests Omar sell his and Ronaldo's cut back to Prop Joe, 20 on the dollar. Well, that's exactly what Omar does.
Well, it just so happened I got some heroin for sale. Market-wise, you fellas look like buyers, you feel me?
Prop Joe agrees to the deal, and Omar walks away with 400 large and decides to retire. He gives Butchie a parting gift and says goodbye, while Butchie warns.
You stole this much. This ain't over.
But for the moment, Omar walks away on top, all the while keeping his word to Bunk. No bodies. If this were where the show ended, even with the stuff I didn't talk about from Season 3, I could understand the idea of The Wire romanticizing Omar. He was a living legend before, but now he adds to his resume beating a murder charge, surviving a 5-figure bounty, ripping off what was basically a citywide re-up, and then promptly fucking off to Puerto Rico? No sé. But the point is that Omar was already a street legend, but after pulling off the big heist and retiring, he's a street deity. But as this show illustrates time and again, actions have consequences. Bunk tried to get Omar to swear he wouldn't get even with Marlo, but that wasn't what Omar agreed to. He got his revenge, and managed to do so without racking up a kill count. The co-op is willing to just say, it's all in the game, and move on, but not Marlo. He puts the word out on Omar, and ends up paying Cheese 50 large for telling them about Butchie. Chris and Snoop then pay him a visit and torture him to death looking for Omar. But unlike Brandon, we actually see it play out on screen. It, sucks. Butchie takes it to the end and doesn't give up a thing like a fucking king. Something Chris clearly respects.
You're a tough man.
And they leave someone alive as messenger. To close the episode, we see Omar in retirement, handing out candy to kids. I love this shot, a direct contrast to his stroll through the low-rises back in Season 1. When he and Ronaldo get back home, he hears about Butchie and returns to Baltimore. He has a meeting with the living messenger, and Omar's vengeance returns with a vengeance. First, he pays a visit to Slim Charles, greeting the old acquaintance with a loaded gun. At this point, Omar is seeking out Prop Joe, because Omar thinks Prop Joe gave up Butchie. Slim doesn't plead or give a word until Omar pistol whips him. He only speaks when he's on the ground, and he only speaks facts.
If Marlo can make him talk, he puts Joe inside your big score.
I love this shot of Omar. You can see the gears turning in his head as he realizes he didn't think it through. He's so blinded by revenge, he's lashing out with less care or consideration than ever. Like the boss he is, Slim says,
"Come on, yo. Finish."
We know it's not in Omar's nature to murder in cold blood, and that he gave his word to Bunk he wouldn't drop any more bodies. But Slim knows neither of those things. He's operating on the reputation I mentioned earlier. And just like Brother Mouzone in Season 2, Omar sees Slim is telling the truth and leaves. Unable to find who dropped the dime on Butchie, Omar turns his sights on Marlo. Omar and Butchie's guys spend over an episode playing a game of cat and mouse. They watch folks come and go from an apartment and plan for 2 people overnight. Unfortunately, it's an ambush. Chris, Snoop, O-Dog, and Michael are waiting. 4, not 2. Butchie's guy gets domed, and Omar makes a dash, leaps off the 4th-story balcony, and vanishes.
What the?
To start the next episode, Marlo's crew looks tirelessly for Omar. Chris looks in vacants, Snoop visits hospitals, and Monk pretends to be a police detective, which is exactly as funny as it sounds.
No, sorry. Oh my god, that's terrible. Is the woman all right?
Huh?
The woman, is she all right?
Yeah, she good.
Marlo even comes to see the site for himself, and he can't believe it. Guys, come on, why is this not a popular reaction gif? Anyway, Marlo immediately understands the gravity of the situation.
We missed our shot. That ain't gonna be at us.
Finally, we see Omar in a closet, playing self-doctor on his busted ankle. He makes a makeshift cast and crutches, and as he leaves, the camera work is perfect. He was right under their nose the whole time. At this point, Omar's character operates as a contradiction. Mentally, he has the drive to wage war like never before, but physically, he's incapacitated. He's broken, physically and mentally, running on 2 hearts, and still Omar goes goblin mode on Marlo's organization. He's not dropping bodies, but he's still got his goal.
Now you make sure you tell old Marlo I burn the money, cause it ain't about that paper. It's about me hurting his people and messing with his world.
He burns money and flushes drugs because he's on that Joker wavelength. It's not about the money, it's about sending a message. In Omar's case, it's specifically about provoking Marlo into confronting him.
Marlo Stanfield is not a man for this town!
But it fails. Chris and Snoop consciously decide to keep it from him. The only reason I can think of being they don't think Marlo can handle Omar, even if his ankle is oatmeal. But that's for another time. Eventually, Omar jumps Savino as he's buying a pack of Nupos. Unlike Brother Mouzone or Slim Charles, however, Savino immediately pleads his case.
I wasn't there. When he did the old man like that, I wasn't there.
Omar is not fond of this.
What you was gonna do if you was there?
So he executes Savino in cold blood, breaking both his code and his word to Bunk with one squeeze of the trigger. Morally, this is Omar's turning point, and not only does he not regret it, he brags about it to Michael's crew and promises it will continue.
Tell that man I'ma drop all his muscle till he get the heart to come down to the street and dance.
Finally, we see Omar walk past some kids in the street. Peak 2000s moment right here. Kids playing outside, not a phone in sight, just living in the moment and pouring lighter fluid on cats. Omar may be at his lowest point, mentally, spiritually, and physically, but to the game, he's still Omar. He scares off the muscle, dumps the stash, and calls Marlo to step 2. He then decompresses by buying a pack of Nupos and gets domed. The end. No pathos, no final showdown, no blaze of glory send-off, just a quick, sudden death. There are so many layers to unpack here. First off, it was Kennard, a little kid. Omar even looks down at him, and you can almost hear him talk about Michael in this moment.
He's just a kid. Let me get one of them too.
The episode prior, we saw Kennard was unimpressed with Omar when he rolls up on Michael's corner, and again when he's playing with the cat in the alley. For him, watching Omar lip around was a real emperor has no clothes moment. This supposed street deity can't even walk right. And judging by the look of surprise he has after Omar's body drops, this was likely done on a whim. In this moment, Kennard was the dog who caught the car. And for Omar, well, that's the end of his story, obviously. Bunk arrives at the scene and seems upset at the sight of Omar's body, until he sees Omar's note showing Marlo's corners, and then he seems just as upset at Omar for breaking his word.
Back on the hunt, were you?
Alma, the police reporter at the Baltimore Sun, catches wind of the murder and wants to write on it, but it gets edited out for space. The death of a street deity isn't worth the newspaper inches. And finally, we see him in the morgue, his body mislabeled, illustrating the lack of recognition one gets from his life. In a way, it mirrors what Beatty told McNulty.
They don't show up at your wake. You're not because they don't like you, but because they never knew your last name.
Given one of the first things we heard about Omar was this.
Got a last name?
Just Omar. You don't need no last name.
To me, though, the most interesting aspect of Omar's demise is Omar's code. His quest for revenge may have pulled him out of retirement and into the grave, but his code kept him alive. His turning point came after he executed Savino, as 3 scenes later, he's gone. Omar lived by his code, and his vengeance finally drove him to break that code. Thematically, breaking his code cost him his life. Therefore, one could argue that Omar's code worked out for him. After all, it's why Bunk visited him in prison in the first place. However, the show does not idealize or romanticize Omar's code, as it painstakingly illustrates the wider effects of such a violent way of life. I actually glossed over one moment earlier, when Chris one-taps the delivery lady. I'm not entirely sure it's fair to put this blood on Omar's hands, as it was Marlo's call and Prop Joe was the one who put him on the poker game, but if Omar didn't rob that game, Chris doesn't send this taxpayer to the Shadow Realm. By comparison, the show is much less ambiguous with responsibility in the one section I haven't talked about yet, the front half of Season 3. This is back when Omar was rolling with Dante, Kimmy, and Tasha, and Omar six that foursome fearsome onto one target, Avon Barksdale. They pull off robberies of questionable validity, and then Omar calls out Stringer by name.
He called you by name, String. I mean, all due respect.
Even when they respond with increased muscle, Omar refuses to back down, confusing Kimmy and Tasha in the process.
So why?
Because.
Because?
Indeed.
You can read this line one of 2 ways, depending on how you answered this question. Do you think Omar told everyone why he's feuding with the Barksdales? Do they know about his revenge tour for Brandon? I feel the answer is no, given Dante was MIA when Omar hunted Brother Mouzone. In this case, this is him simply not wanting to explain himself, be it personal pain, or fear they'll get cold feet, or something else. On the other hand, if he did tell them about Brandon, this line reads almost the opposite. It's him saying, "The hell kind of question is that? I got a man to avenge. Why do you think we're here?" Regardless of the interpretation, this quest for vengeance costs them all. They get caught in an ambush, and in the firefight, the writers forget to turn off friendly fire, and Dante accidentally drops Tasha, which causes Kimmy to lock in and drop a Barksdale soldier in retaliation. This single event foreshadows Omar's demise in Season 5. A vengeance-fueled quest leads to an unforeseen personal cost. In Season 5, it cost him his life, but in Season 3, it cost him Tasha. He mourns in his own way and takes responsibility and apologizes to Kimmy and Dante. He feels the cult and decides to back off the Barksdales, until he doesn't, but we already went over that. However, this battle does have real-world implications. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in the streets of Baltimore, and Bunk gets put on the case. He talks to Tasha's family, and they give Omar his card. Bunk eventually talks to a witness, but Omar shuts that route down.
Speaking of them Trumps now.
Thus, Omar invites Bunk for a sit-down, in what becomes my other favorite scene in the show. I've mentioned Bunk a lot throughout this video, but I haven't talked about him too much. To date in the show, 2.5 seasons of The Wire, 30 episodes of TV, Bunk has pretty much been comic relief. That's not to take away from him up to this point. He's smart, he's natural police, but aside from a few moments...
Taurine, Boyle, some motherfucker named Liggett, it's there in the report.
Taurine Boyd, Roland Leggett.
He really doesn't show too much depth until this scene. Omar makes clear Bunk will get no cooperation in solving the case. All his leads are gone, he has no one to help him, he's at a dead end. Crucially, in making this clear, Omar says this.
Shoot, the way y'all look on things, ain't no victim to even speak on.
It really speaks to how the players playing the game view themselves as apart from society. Omar makes a distinction between a drug dealer and a pharmacist. One works on the corner, one pays taxes. One is fair game, one is off limits. To those playing the game, killing each other is part of the rulebook. The idea of committing quote-unquote murder is only as relevant as the police that might kick down your door. And they carry on with these rules without any regard for larger society. Bunk seems to understand this deeper meaning immediately, and it causes him to snap.
All this death, you don't think that ripples out?
Another line that carries so much weight, and coming from Bunk no less. His lecture to Omar makes clear that, whether they're in the game or not, murder victims are murder victims. It recontextualizes all of Bunk's previous characterization. He sees the violent consequences of the game, and underneath all the booze and the jokes, he cares. It might be a drug war to those fighting, but to Bunk, it's people from his community getting gunned down, day in and day out, and it weighs on him. In this moment, hearing Omar's complete disregard for the broader implications of his actions almost makes him lose his shit.
You don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about.
I'm not going to dive too far into Bunk's lecture here, as a lot of it touches on like a half dozen different themes. But he highlights the collective cohesion of the community that he and Omar grew up in. Omar operates with his code, sure, but when they were younger, it wasn't the exception.
Rough as that neighborhood could be, we had us a community. Nobody, no victim, who didn't matter.
And then he immediately drives the point home to Omar.
And now all we got is bodies and predatory motherfuckers like you.
Bunk's words to Omar parallel Levy. The latter calls him a leeching parasite, and the former a predatory motherfucker. And they both do so to shame him. The crucial difference is their motivation. Levy wanted to highlight Omar's criminal record to discredit him for the jury so he can get Bird acquitted for murder. On the other hand, Bunk plays on the morality he knows Omar has to get him to understand the broader implications of his action.
And out where that girl fell, I saw kids acting like Omar, calling you by name, glorifying your ass. Makes me sick, motherfucker, how far we done fell.
Monsters may not care when their actions impact children, but even the hardest men do. And given Omar's soft spot for kids, these words hit him twice as hard. He got force-fed such an ugly truth by Bunk, he couldn't swallow it. He then talks about the conversation with his confidant, Butchie. Butchie basically tells Omar, don't let Bunk guilt trip you. But Omar says,
that fat man gave me an itch I can't scratch, Butchie.
Well, I think I know why this is the case. Bunk's monologue isn't him telling Omar to button up and fly straight. It's a fatherly lecture. And based on the kids' lives in Season 4, it's very possible this is the first time Omar ever heard one. That's why he feels the need to give something back. In the end, that something is Officer Dozerman's stolen gun. Butchie said it cost $1,500, which is a pretty penny, but a lot less dramatical than 2 fingers. As we discussed, this was a life-saving decision for Omar, but in the moment, it was a lifesaver for Bunk, more than Omar realized. After all, Bunk didn't get Bruiser's statement because Landsman cock-blocked him with the gun. So Omar returning it almost counterbalances intimidating Bruiser himself, meaning Omar continues to play the game the way he always did, on his own terms. So after covering his entire story, let's try to answer the question. What is Omar Little? He's certainly not a hero. A folk hero for sure, but no hero. Is he an anti-hero? Well, many folks label Luthen Rael an anti-hero, and fuck those people, but Omar is no Luthen. He has his code, yes, and he does some good things like help the police, but I spent the last 25 pages going over his motivations, and they weren't exactly the greater good. Does this make him a villain? Yes. Hey, hold up, you might say. Avon and Marlo are villains, and Omar is not either of those guys. He has his code. But in reality, Omar's code is almost a facade. It's simply his threshold of violence he's willing to inflict on others. And when push comes to shove, we see where his priorities lie. His code, no snitching, no bodies, no murder, it's all gone when Omar seeks vengeance. It's true, he never ices civilians, but within the game, Omar is as ruthless as they come, not to mention the broader effects of the violence the game creates. Omar's no hero and no anti-hero, so Omar Little is a villain. But whether or not you grade on this West Baltimore curve, I agree that Omar is too contradictory to feel like a villain, but he's simply not heroic enough to be a true anti-hero. To me, more than anything, this makes Omar a human being. After all, the human mind is full of contradictions, and so is Omar. I think it says something about how he's written, and probably myself as well, that my 2 favorite scenes across all 5 seasons exemplify the 2 sides of this fascinating character. One is of a living legend sparring in a verbal duel while setting up for an actual duel, and the other is of a murderous hitman getting dressed down for the ripple effects of his violence by, of all people, a fucking cop. Omar, more than just about any other character I've experienced in fiction, is human. He has his motives, his code, his attitudes, and his way of life. These can be difficult to decipher and understand because in real life, people can be difficult to understand. Their motives, their morals, their worldviews, not to mention our own. Omar Little is the most human character I've ever seen on TV. And if you watch the show and his character resonates with you, or if you start to get defensive when I call Omar a villain, it probably means you're human too. Thanks for watching.